Behind the explosive action and heart-pounding thrills of Speed lies a treasure trove of bizarre production secrets. From a woman who nearly died, jumping onto a bus packed with explosives, to Joss Whedon secretly writing 98% of the dialogue without credit. The film's most famous line has a mystery writer. Keanu Reeves went completely bald against studio wishes, and the iconic bus jump was deemed physically impossible by scientists. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Speed 1994. Fact 1. Jos Weeden Ghost wrote nearly all the dialogue. While Graham Yost gets sole credit as the screenwriter of Speed, the truth is that future Avengers director Joss Whedon secretly rewrote nearly the entire script, transforming what could have been a simple action movie into the witty, character-driven thriller that audiences fell in love with. According to Yost himself, Whedon wrote approximately 98.9% of all the dialogue that made it to the screen, yet received absolutely no credit for his massive contribution. The situation began when Whedon was brought in as what Hollywood calls a script doctor, someone hired to fix problems with an existing screenplay. At the time, Whedon was still years away from creating Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and had only written the original Buffy movie and worked on a few other projects. The original Speed script had the basic story structure and action sequences in place, but the dialogue needed serious work to make the characters feel real and relatable. Whedon completely transformed how the characters spoke to each other, crafting the sharp, natural-sounding conversations that made audiences care about everyone trapped on that bus. He took Yost's solid foundation of story beats and character concepts and gave them voices that felt authentic and engaging. The collaboration worked so well that both writers have spoken positively about each other's contributions over the years, with Yost freely admitting that Whedon was simply better at writing dialogue than he was. However, when it came time for the Writers Guild of America to determine screen credits, Whedon lost the arbitration battle. Under Guild rules at the time, rewriting dialogue alone wasn't considered substantial enough to warrant shared credit, even when that dialogue represented the vast majority of what audiences actually heard. The Guild felt that since Yost had created the characters, story structure, and major plot points, he deserved sole credit despite Whedon's extensive work on the script. Whedon later described losing the credit as devastating, especially since the studio had initially planned to give him recognition. He kept the only movie poster that included his name as a memento of his uncredited work on one of the 90s most successful action films. Fact 2. Nobody knows who wrote Pop Quiz Hotshot. One of the most memorable lines in action movie history has become Hollywood's greatest mystery, because absolutely no one involved with Speed will take credit for writing it. The 3 words that Dennis Hopper delivers with chilling precision have stumped every writer who worked on the script, creating what might be the most famous orphaned quote in cinema. The phrase appears when Hopper's villain Howard Payne calls Keanu Reeves' character Jack to explain the deadly bus situation, and it instantly became the line that audiences remembered and quoted long after leaving theaters. For nearly 3 decades, fans have approached screenwriter Graham Yost at events and conventions, repeating those words back to him with knowing grins, assuming he created this iconic moment. Yost has spent years politely smiling and nodding while internally cringing, because he knows he didn't write the line that everyone associates with his biggest success. When Joss Whedon rewrote most of the dialogue, many people naturally assumed the catchy phrase must have come from him, given his talent for memorable one-liners that would later define characters in Buffy and the Avengers. However, Whedon has consistently denied writing it, stating clearly that the line was already present in the script when he began his rewrite work. He's expressed some frustration that people credit him with the only line from Speed that everyone remembers, when he actually wrote almost everything else. The mystery deepened when researchers examined various drafts of the script and discovered that another writer, Paul Atanasio, had also worked on the project as a script doctor. Atanasio seemed like the most likely candidate to have created the phrase, but when asked directly, he couldn't recall writing it either. This created the bizarre situation where 3 professional writers, who all contributed to the screenplay, have no memory of crafting what became the film's signature moment. The truth may be that the line emerged during one of the many informal rewrite sessions that happen during movie productions, possibly suggested by a producer, director, or even an actor during rehearsals, which would explain why none of the credited writers remember creating it. Fact 3. A woman nearly died in the first bus explosion. The very first explosion filmed for Speed almost became a real-life tragedy when an unsuspecting woman ran onto the movie set and jumped aboard a bus that was packed with explosives and ready to detonate. This terrifying near-miss happened during the filming of the opening sequence where Dennis Hopper's character destroys a city bus to get Jack's attention. And it came within seconds of becoming a genuine disaster. The production team was filming on Main Street in Venice, California, using a complex setup that involved switching between a real bus and a dummy bus loaded with explosives. The plan called for cameras to follow the real bus as it made a left turn, while the fake bus filled with bombs and pyrotechnics would continue straight ahead to the predetermined explosion point. Special effects supervisor John Fraser had positioned his crew at a safe distance and armed the detonation system, waiting for the bus to reach the exact mark where the explosion would look perfect on camera. Everything was proceeding according to plan when suddenly a woman came running down the hill toward the bus, apparently thinking she was late for her regular public transportation. She had no idea that a movie was being filmed and assumed this was just a normal city bus running behind schedule. The woman completely bypassed the production assistants who were supposed to keep civilians away from the dangerous area and jumped directly onto the vehicle that was loaded with enough explosives to create a spectacular Hollywood explosion. Fraser immediately spotted the unexpected passenger and began shouting abort commands while frantically trying to get everyone's attention to stop the detonation. His foreman, Rocky Gere, had his finger on the firing button and was ready to trigger the explosion the moment the bus reached its mark. Fortunately, Gere noticed something had jumped onto the bus, though in all the noise and confusion he wasn't sure if it was a person or possibly just a stray dog. This moment of uncertainty made him pull his hand away from the detonation button just in time. The woman found herself sitting next to a dummy driver and surrounded by explosive charges, completely unaware of how close she had come to being killed in what would have been a horrific accident disguised as a movie stunt. Fact 4. Keanu Reeves shaved his head completely bald. Keanu Reeves made one of the most dramatic physical transformations of his career for Speed, when he completely shaved off all his hair, going from his signature flowing locks to a nearly bald appearance that shocked both fans and studio executives. This radical change happened because director Jan de Bont had a very specific vision for how the character of Jack Traven should look and feel on screen. In 1993, Keanu was known for having some of the floppiest, most recognizable hair in Hollywood. Sporting the long, tousled style that had become his trademark through movies like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Point Break. His hair was such an integral part of his public image that the idea of cutting it all off seemed almost unthinkable to many people in the industry. However, de Bont felt strongly that Jack Traven needed to project authority and competence as a SWAT officer, and he believed that Keanu's usual hairstyle would work against the character's credibility. The director specifically wanted Jack to look strong and in control of himself, qualities that he felt would be better conveyed through a more military-style appearance. De Bont explained that he didn't want the character to have long hair, because it would undermine the sense that this was a serious, professional law enforcement officer who could handle extreme situations. When Keanu agreed to shave his head almost completely bald, the studio initially expressed concern about such a drastic change to one of their rising stars' appearance. The transformation was so complete that it essentially gave Keanu an entirely different look, one that was much more severe and authoritative than anything audiences had seen from him before. The decision proved to be the right one for the character, as the short hair helped Keanu embody the focused, no-nonsense personality that Jack needed to have throughout the film. The new look also required Keanu to spend 2 months in the gym building muscle mass to complete the physical transformation into a believable action hero, showing his commitment to fully becoming the character that de Bont had envisioned. Fact 5. The bus jump is scientifically impossible. The most famous stunt in Speed turns out to be completely impossible in real life, as proven by the television show Mythbusters when they attempted to recreate the iconic bus jump using actual physics and engineering. Their full-scale experiment failed so dramatically that it confirmed what scientists had suspected all along about this spectacular movie moment. In the film, the bus traveling at 70 miles per hour successfully leaps across a 50-foot gap in an unfinished freeway and lands safely on the other side, allowing the passengers to continue their harrowing journey. This scene became one of the most memorable action sequences of the 1990s, but it also raised serious questions among physics experts about whether such a feat could actually be accomplished. The Mythbusters team decided to put the stunt to the test in 2009, using both scale models and a full-sized bus to determine if the jump was physically possible. They started by building a small-scale model of the bus and the freeway gap, then calculated the exact speed and trajectory needed for success. Even at this reduced scale, their initial test showed that the bus would fall far short of reaching the other side of the gap. When they moved to full-scale testing, the results were even more discouraging. The team acquired a bus with the same dimensions as the one used in the movie and found that it could only reach 58 miles per hour, significantly slower than the 70 miles per hour depicted in the film. They built ramps and adjusted the gap distance to account for the lower speed. But even with these modifications, their bus plunged dramatically short of the target and crashed into concrete safety barriers. The experiment revealed that a real bus jumping at highway speeds would nosedive rather than soar gracefully through the air, as basic physics dictates that such a heavy vehicle cannot maintain the necessary trajectory. The Mythbusters concluded that even with perfect conditions, ramps, and maximum speed, the bus jump remains firmly in the realm of movie magic, rather than real-world possibility. Fact 6. The movie literally ran out of money. Speed faced such severe budget problems during production that the filmmakers literally ran out of money before they could finish shooting the movie, creating a bizarre situation where test audiences watched incomplete footage that included animated storyboards instead of actual scenes. This financial crisis forced the studio to get creative about how to complete what would become one of the biggest action hits of the 1990s. The budget troubles became most apparent during the subway sequences that form the climactic final act of the film, where Dennis Hopper's villain takes Sandra Bullock hostage on a runaway train. These scenes required extensive set construction, complex practical effects, and careful coordination of stunts and explosions, all of which cost significantly more money than the production had remaining in its accounts. When the time came for the first test screening to gauge audience reactions, the filmmakers found themselves in the embarrassing position of having to show a movie that wasn't actually finished. Instead of the polished subway chase that audiences would eventually see in theaters, viewers at this early screening watched animated storyboards that showed basic drawings of what the scenes were supposed to look like, complete with simple illustrations of characters and action sequences. Despite this unconventional presentation, the test audience response was so positive that it convinced studio executives the movie had real potential for success. The enthusiastic reactions from viewers who had essentially watched an elaborate cartoon version of the film's ending gave the studio confidence to find additional funding to complete the production properly. The financial rescue allowed the filmmakers to go back and shoot the subway scenes with full production values, including the elaborate train sets and practical effects that made the final chase sequence so memorable. This last-minute funding also covered the extensive post-production work needed to create the seamless action movie that audiences ultimately experienced, proving that sometimes running out of money can actually help demonstrate how strong a story really is when even rough storyboards can captivate an audience. Fact 7. Bus number 2525 is a mathematical Easter egg. Hidden in plain sight throughout Speed is a clever mathematical Easter egg that most viewers completely miss, even though they see it displayed prominently on the roof and sides of the bus in nearly every exterior shot. The bus number 2525 was deliberately chosen by the filmmakers because when you add 25 plus 25, you get 50, which perfectly matches the critical 50-mile-per-hour speed limit that drives the entire plot of the movie. This numerical connection shows just how much attention director Jan de Bont and his team paid to even the smallest details when creating their high-speed thriller. While audiences were focused on the life-or-death situation unfolding inside the vehicle, the production designers were carefully selecting every visible element to reinforce the central concept of the film, including something as seemingly mundane as a transit authority identification number. The mathematical relationship becomes especially meaningful when you consider that the 50-mile-per-hour threshold is what transforms an ordinary city bus into a deadly weapon. Once the bus reaches that speed, the bomb becomes armed and ready to explode if the vehicle slows down even slightly below the limit. By encoding this crucial number directly into the bus identification, the filmmakers created a subtle visual reminder of the constant danger that every character faces throughout their journey. Most viewers naturally focus on the action and dialogue rather than studying the technical markings on the vehicle, which is exactly why this Easter egg works so well as a hidden detail for observant fans to discover. The fact that such a simple piece of information was carefully planned rather than randomly assigned demonstrates the level of thought that went into every aspect of the production, from major story elements down to props that appear for just a few seconds on screen. Even today, many longtime fans of the movie are surprised to learn about this connection when it's pointed out to them, making it one of those satisfying discoveries that adds an extra layer of appreciation for the filmmaker's craftsmanship and attention to detail. Fact 8. Halle Berry turned down Annie's role. One of Hollywood's biggest what-if scenarios involves Halle Berry turning down the role of Annie Porter in Speed, a decision she would later describe as one of the most regrettable mistakes of her entire career. This surprising casting near-miss opened the door for Sandra Bullock to land the role that would transform her from a relatively unknown actress into one of the biggest stars of the 1990s. At the time Speed was being cast, Halle Berry was already an established actress who had appeared in several films and was building a solid reputation in Hollywood. The character of Annie Porter was originally written quite differently than what audiences eventually saw on screen, as the role was initially conceived as an African-American paramedic whose medical training would help explain her ability to take control of the bus and handle the high-pressure situation. The original character concept made Halle Berry a natural choice for the casting directors, and she was offered the part early in the development process. However, Berry ultimately decided to pass on the opportunity, likely because the role seemed relatively small compared to other projects she was considering at the time. In the early 1990s, action movies were not typically known for giving female characters substantial development or screen time, so it would have been reasonable for any actress to question whether this particular role would advance her career. Years later, after Speed became a massive hit and launched Sandra Bullock into superstardom, Halle Berry publicly expressed regret about her decision to decline the role. She acknowledged that turning down Speed was one of the biggest professional mistakes she had made, especially considering how the film's success could have changed the trajectory of her career at that crucial early stage. The irony is that while Berry went on to have tremendous success, including becoming the first African-American woman to win an Academy Award for Best Actress, she missed out on being part of one of the most beloved action films of the decade. A movie that made Sandra Bullock a household name practically overnight. Fact 9. Ellen DeGeneres was considered for Annie. Ellen DeGeneres came surprisingly close to starring in Speed as Annie Porter, which would have created an entirely different movie since the character was originally designed to provide comic relief rather than serve as a romantic interest for Keanu Reeves' character. This casting consideration reveals how dramatically the role evolved during the development process and how different the final film could have been. During the early stages of script development, the writers and producers were still figuring out exactly what kind of character Annie should be and how she would fit into the overall story. At this point in the creative process, They envisioned her primarily as someone who would lighten the mood during the intense bus sequences with humor and witty observations, rather than as the capable and determined woman who ultimately becomes Jack's partner in both the mission and romance. Ellen DeGeneres was a natural choice for this version of the character because she was already well known for her stand-up comedy career and her ability to find humor in stressful situations. Her comedic timing and relatable personality would have been perfect for delivering one-liners and keeping the passengers' spirits up during their terrifying ordeal. The producers likely felt that having a professional comedian in the role would guarantee that the lighter moments would land effectively with audiences. However, as the script continued to evolve, the filmmakers realized that Annie needed to be more than just comic relief to make the story work properly. They began rewriting the character as someone who could genuinely contribute to solving the crisis while also developing a believable romantic connection with Jack. This shift in the character's purpose meant that they needed an actress who could handle both dramatic tension and romantic chemistry, rather than focusing primarily on comedy. The transformation of Annie from a comedic sidekick into a strong female lead ultimately led to Sandra Bullock being cast in the role, but it's fascinating to imagine how Ellen DeGeneres might have brought her own unique energy and humor to this high-stakes action thriller. Fact 10. The bus jump stunt driver almost broke his spine. The famous bus jump in Speed required 2 terrifying attempts after the first try went disastrously wrong, with the stunt driver missing the crucial takeoff ramp and destroying the bus completely, forcing the production team to wait 2 days before they could attempt the dangerous stunt again. This harrowing experience made the successful second attempt even more remarkable and showed just how risky these practical effects really were. Director Jan de Bont later revealed that the bus jump was the only stunt in the entire movie that left him feeling disappointed, not because of the final result, but because of how badly the first attempt went. The production team had carefully designed a specialized ramp system to give the bus the necessary lift to clear the gap, but during the first take, something went wrong with the timing or positioning, and the stunt driver completely missed hitting the ramp at the right angle. Without the ramp to provide the proper trajectory, the bus crashed in a way that made it impossible to use for any additional filming, leaving the crew with a destroyed vehicle and no footage of the jump that they desperately needed for the movie. The impact was so severe that it raised serious concerns about the safety of attempting the stunt again, especially considering the physical dangers that the driver had just experienced. The crew was particularly worried about the risk of spinal injury, since the violent impact of a failed bus jump could easily cause the kind of back trauma that might permanently disable or even kill a stunt performer. Despite these legitimate safety concerns, the production team knew they needed this spectacular moment for the film, so they spent 2 days preparing a second bus and making sure that every detail of the jump would be executed perfectly. When they finally attempted the stunt for the second time, the driver successfully hit the ramp and made the jump, though the bus traveled much farther than anyone had expected and ended up destroying one of the cameras that had been positioned to capture the landing. Fortunately, another camera placed 90 feet away from the jump ramp managed to record the successful stunt. Fact 11. River Phoenix's death changed the filming schedule. During the production of Speed in 1993, director Jan de Bont made the compassionate decision to completely restructure the filming schedule after learning that Keanu Reeves' close friend and fellow actor River Phoenix had died unexpectedly. This tragic event deeply affected Reeves and prompted de Bont to adjust which scenes they would film during this difficult period, showing remarkable sensitivity to his lead actor's emotional needs. River Phoenix and Keanu Reeves had developed a strong friendship while working together on the film My Own Private Idaho just a few years earlier, and Phoenix's sudden death on October 31, 1993, came as a devastating shock to Reeves and the entire Hollywood community. Phoenix was only 23 years old and had been considered one of the most promising young actors of his generation, making his loss particularly tragic for those who knew him personally. When de Bont learned about Phoenix's death and saw how profoundly it had affected Reeves, He immediately recognized that his star would need time to process this grief while still fulfilling his professional obligations to complete the movie. Rather than pushing forward with the original schedule regardless of Reeves' emotional state, DeBont made the thoughtful decision to rearrange which scenes they would shoot during the following weeks. The director specifically chose to film less emotionally demanding sequences during this period, avoiding scenes that would require Reeves to access intense emotions or perform particularly challenging dramatic moments. This approach allowed Reeves to continue working and maintain the production schedule while giving him space to mourn his friend without having to deliver his most difficult performances during such a raw and painful time. DeBont later noted that the loss made Reeves noticeably quieter and more withdrawn during filming, which actually informed some aspects of his character's more serious moments in the finished film. This compassionate handling of a personal tragedy during a major Hollywood production demonstrates how thoughtful leadership can help actors navigate the intersection of their personal and professional lives during difficult circumstances. Fact 12. The famous gap wasn't actually 50 feet. Despite Keanu Reeves clearly stating in the movie that the freeway gap measures 50 feet across, the actual digital gap that appears on screen is a massive 177 feet wide, more than 3 times larger than what the characters claim they need to jump. This dramatic difference reveals how filmmakers prioritized visual impact over mathematical accuracy to create the most thrilling possible scene for audiences. The discrepancy occurred during post-production when the digital effects team at Sony Pictures Imageworks realized that a properly scaled 50-foot gap would appear disappointingly small when viewed through the camera lens. When they created test versions of the scene using the accurate measurement, the gap looked so narrow that it failed to convey the sense of mortal danger that the story required, making the bus jump seem like a relatively minor obstacle rather than the life or death challenge it was supposed to represent. To solve this visual problem, the effects artists made the creative decision to expand the gap to more than 3 times its stated size, measuring the final digital chasm against other known structures in the shot to ensure the proportions looked dramatic and threatening on the big screen. This approach allowed them to create a gap that genuinely looked impossible to cross, which was essential for maintaining the audience's belief that the characters were facing an seemingly insurmountable challenge. The team achieved this illusion by carefully painting out sections of the actual freeway and replacing them with empty space, along with adding realistic details like exposed rebar and construction materials that would be visible at the edges of such a massive break in the roadway. They also had to create convincing shadows and lighting effects to make the enlarged gap blend seamlessly with the real footage of the bus and surrounding environment. This decision perfectly demonstrates how movie magic often requires departing from real-world logic to serve the emotional needs of the story, proving that sometimes what feels true to audiences matters more than what is mathematically accurate, according to the character's dialogue. Fact 13. Sandra Bullock's Gum Scene Was Improvised. One of the most memorable character moments in Speed happened completely by accident, when Sandra Bullock improvised a scene involving chewing gum that wasn't written in the original script, creating an authentic moment that perfectly captured her character's personality while adding a touch of humor to the tense bus sequences. This spontaneous piece of acting demonstrates how talented performers can enhance a script by finding natural ways to make their characters feel more real and relatable. The scene occurs early in the bus portion of the movie when Annie is sitting next to an obnoxious passenger who is making her uncomfortable with his behavior and comments. In the scripted version, Annie would have simply moved to a different seat without any specific reason being given for the change, but Bullock felt that this transition needed a more believable motivation that audiences could understand and connect with. During filming, Bullock came up with the idea of pretending to take chewing gum out of her mouth and acting like she was going to stick it on her seat, which would give her a perfectly reasonable excuse to get up and move away from the annoying passenger. This small gesture accomplished several things at once by providing a logical reason for her movement, showing Annie's quick thinking and resourcefulness. and adding a moment of levity that helped balance the intense life-or-death situation surrounding the characters. Director Jan de Bont immediately recognized that this improvised moment worked beautifully within the scene and decided to keep it in the final cut of the movie. The gum business felt so natural and genuine that many viewers assume it was always part of the script, not realizing that they were watching Bullock's own creative contribution to the character development. This type of on-set improvisation is relatively rare in big-budget action movies, where most scenes are carefully planned and choreographed in advance, but it shows how the right actor can find opportunities to add personality and authenticity even within the constraints of a highly structured production focused primarily on spectacular stunts and special effects. Fact 14. Test audiences walked backwards to bathrooms. One of the clearest signs that Speed would become a massive hit came from an unusual observation during test screenings, when producers noticed that audience members were literally walking backwards to the bathrooms so they could keep watching the screen and avoid missing even a few seconds of the action. This bizarre but telling behavior immediately convinced studio executives that they had captured something special with their high-speed thriller. Test screenings are a crucial part of the Hollywood filmmaking process, where studios show rough cuts of movies to regular audiences before the final release to gauge reactions and identify potential problems. During these sessions, producers and executives carefully watch both the movie and the audience, looking for signs of engagement or excitement that might indicate how the film will perform when it reaches theaters nationwide. Most movies struggle to hold audience attention for their entire running time, and it's common for people to get up during screenings to use restrooms, check their phones, or simply take breaks from watching. However, the speed test audiences displayed completely different behavior that caught everyone's attention and made it clear that this action movie was having an unusually powerful effect on viewers. The sight of people shuffling backwards down theater aisles while keeping their eyes glued to the screen was so remarkable that it became a legendary story within 21st Century Fox about how they knew they had a potential blockbuster on their hands. This kind of physical commitment from audiences demonstrated that the film's relentless pacing and constant tension were working exactly as intended, creating a viewing experience so compelling that people were unwilling to look away even for basic necessities. The backward bathroom walks became such a reliable indicator of the movie's success that producers began specifically watching for this behavior during subsequent test screenings, using it as an informal but highly accurate measure of how well the film was connecting with audiences and maintaining their complete attention throughout the entire experience. Fact 15. The film has a hidden Die Hard connection. Speed contains a subtle visual Easter egg that connects it directly to the action classic Die Hard through the appearance of a fictional company called Pacific Courier, whose logo appears on both the cargo plane that explodes in Speed's finale and on the truck used by the terrorists in Die Hard. This hidden link between the two films exists because Jan de Bont served as the cinematographer on Die Hard before becoming the director of Speed 6 years later. The Pacific Courier connection is easy to miss because the company name appears only briefly in both movies, as background detail on vehicles that are involved in explosive action sequences. In Die Hard, the logo can be spotted on the truck that brings some of the terrorists to Nakatomi Plaza, while in Speed, it's visible on the cargo plane that gets destroyed when the empty bus crashes into it at Los Angeles International Airport during the film's climactic moments. This type of visual callback is relatively rare in Hollywood productions, especially between films made by different studios, but it demonstrates how crew members often carry personal touches and inside jokes from one project to another throughout their careers. As the cinematographer on Die Hard, de Bont would have been intimately familiar with every visual detail in that film, including the various company names and logos that appeared on props and vehicles throughout the production. When de Bont got the opportunity to direct Speed, he apparently decided to include this small tribute to his earlier work, creating a subtle connection that only the most observant viewers would notice. The Pacific Courier reference serves as a kind of signature or calling card that links these two influential action movies through their shared crew member, even though they were produced by different studios and featured completely different stories and characters. This Easter egg also reflects the close-knit nature of Hollywood's action movie community, where crew members often work together on multiple projects and develop ongoing professional relationships that span decades, sometimes leading to these kinds of hidden references that reward fans who pay attention to background details.